Hello, and welcome to this episode of Ruckcast. Ruckcast is your opportunity to listen in on unscripted conversations about cutting-edge Ruckus Wi-Fi and wired networking technology, Ruckus business, and just interesting innovations that impact the computer networking industry today and in the future. Ruckcast is brought to you directly from CommScope Ruckus Education. For more learning opportunities, be sure to log on to training.ruckuswireless.com and view content on our Ruckus Education YouTube channel. Simply search for Ruckus Education on your YouTube homepage. Without further ado, here's your host, Matt Clouda.
Marcelo, there's not a single conversation in this company that starts with API where you're not somehow mentioned or involved in that. So, first of all, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here, and it's great to have you.
Thank you, Matt. I'm also happy to be here and talk about APIs and some of the work I'm doing.
Yeah,
with Ruckus.
I'm looking forward to that. So, real quick, if you don't mind, just give everybody an introduction of who you are and other than API, what you do.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm here in Sunnyvale, and I recently moved from Florida. I was the SCD manager for Latin America until October last year. So I took up this position with the solution engineering team, with Jeanette, with Mo, with Hubby. So the role is pretty much around APIs. So no one inside of Ruckus was taking care of that topic. So it's a very broad subject because we do have APIs in almost every product. So with that, when I started, I got the objective of trying to educate the field, our SEs, the partners, and the customers better on how to consume our APIs for all of our products. So in the beginning, it was pretty much like documentation, but the job is evolving. So that's pretty much it. So my role is to help the field with APIs, how to use, how to talk to customers and to partners, where to find more information. So that's the main idea.
Awesome. So I do want to talk about what some of those customer conversations are, but first I kind of want to ask you. So when you walked into this role, you look at it, was there a strategy kind of already laid out in terms of what the company wanted to do from an API perspective, or was that something that you guys had to sit down and really put together on your own and formulate?
I got the initial directions coming from Jeanette and from Mo, and the main idea was to make the APIs easier to digest. I mean, the main objective was education, field education, and on top of that, trying to create new applications, new use cases, integrating our own products using the APIs and also other vendors using APIs. So the main strategy piece in the beginning was to make the APIs easier to understand by creating maybe more and better documentation, examples, and use cases. So that's how it all started.
So when
back in October.
Yeah. So that's great. So when you look at something like that, did you find it? I guess my curiosity question is when you have those conversations and you look at that and you say, look, we really need to educate customers, partners, even internal folks on
Yes.
the ease of use and the importance of this. Did you find that the conversation was led more towards the customer is looking to do this, so we need to look at enabling it, or the customer isn't aware that this functionality is there? Let's enable them to utilize it because it has a really good benefit to their business.
It's a bit of both, because frankly, we don't do much marketing yet around APIs. So there are many, well, the majority of the customers and partners certainly are not aware of the power of our APIs and the availability of our APIs. So we need to do a better job on that. But we always had some customers, maybe larger companies, service providers. So they have huge Ruckus installs, so they have to do some automation. So those are the ones who were always using the APIs, mainly around Smart Zone. Service providers or large customers using Smart Zone to do automation to create many WLANs, to do portals. So those more skilled customers and partners, they knew already. But we are still kind of giving a white gloves assistance to those customers because they know a little bit, they reach out to us, and we continue with that. We need to do a more massive approach in terms of publishing outside on external sites, and even using GitHub for code samples. We need to do that to expose ourselves more, so we will get more and more customers and more partners using our products and using our APIs to do some interesting automations and integrations.
So point customers and partners to these resources, especially with GitHub. One thing that I want to make sure that this gets put in the front of this podcast, because it's just that important. And GitHub is such a great tool anyways, but all of this effort and work that's being put into it, the intent is to help spread that word. So I'll make sure that links and things that we need are in the description of the podcast when it posts, and so that everybody can see that. But is there anything you want to point somebody to now that has this information?
Well, what we have now is a documentation library and a code repository under our SharePoint site. So they are available now internally, and and what's published internally, I mean, it's a SharePoint site for the SEs, but I guess almost everything there can be sent externally to partners and customers, but it is still internal. So what we will do shortly is to create public website pages. So it's going to be under Conscope Ruckus. And also we will also move or copy the sample codes that we have internally on GitHub. So GitHub is not yet available. It will be available maybe in a month. And the external website pages maybe a couple months or a little more. So we are now working to make those two things externally available. So what we have today is what we produced since not just me, but I started working in October, but I gathered all information around that we had our SEs or PSCs had produced in the past, and they are all consolidated on those internal sites in SharePoint, and our code repository also in SharePoint.
Okay, so August, September, October timeframe, there should be some updates that come out.
Sure. Yes.
That's great. Okay, and I'm sure we're going to circle back and do this again, especially when you have more stuff to communicate, because it's one of those functions that to me is extremely important. And when I look at how APIs interact. Look, I mean, anybody that, all of the probably 4 listeners that we have, haha, just kidding, have heard me say this over and over again, but I come from a switching background, so I'm routing and switching. So when I look at the software-based, GUI-driven applications that we have, and now how we take all of these APIs and tie into it, my eyes get really wide, and I start looking at this in kind of new and different ways. So, some of the big, I guess we'll call them buzzwords, right, or keywords that we're talking about now are things like analytics, Ruckus Cloud, IoT is a big conversation. So if I'm an existing Smart Zone customer, but I'm looking at all of these different products within the portfolio, CloudPath and Spot and everything else that's out there. When I start looking at APIs, what are some of the immediate distinct advantages I'm going to get by pulling these in and starting to fully utilize them?
Well, that's a good question. Let's imagine you are a service provider, or you're selling services. You want to create many WLANs. Let's say you have to create WLANs daily for your customers with different security parameters, VLANs, and so on. So it's a task that can be automated. So we can use APIs to create WLANs, let's say with a DPSK pool, with the correct VLANs assigned to each DPSK pool. Also, let's say I'm using I can use DPSK on CloudPath. So now I have Smart Zone with WLANs, CloudPath with DPSK, 2 products. And let's say I have also ICX switches, 3 products. So I could use a combination of APIs and maybe Ansible to create an end-to-end path flow across from the APs to the ICX, Smart Zone, and CloudPath. So I can automate everything. So instead of me having to go into every separate product and configure VLANs or WLAN or a DPSK pool, I might create a simple script or a simple web GUI interface, and that tool will use API calls to do everything for me. So I can automate things using API. So when I have a massive environment to deploy and do things over and over again, same thing, that's the kind of situation that's pretty good to use APIs on.
So one of the, I love the term automation, because when we think about networks at scale, they're not small, right? I mean, you're talking about large enterprise customers that probably have thousands upon thousands of access points and multiple Smart Zone instances and a lot of different pieces from that portfolio. One of the conversations that some of my peers and I get into, and I always, I'm really curious about, and I think you probably have a really in-touch view on this, is when you start talking to network engineers or Wi-Fi engineers or whatever type of engineer they are. They know the tools very well. They know the products very well. They know the technology very well. Are we starting, because once terms like API and Ansible and things like that came into the conversation, it really changed the landscape of network administration, right? And it also changed the landscape of software engineering, because now you're not in a position to where you're having to build patches into a major release to enable some of this functionality. Now you're in a position to where there's things like APIs and Ansible that allow that functionality. So it's really changing that landscape from my perspective, which is awesome. The one thing I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around is how quickly we're closing the gap between network engineer and automation engineer, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a learning curve. So we were trying to prepare, to create the materials, present the materials, make documentation, presentations, webinars available to the SEs. So we have to cover topics like the technology per se, how to use REST, how to use MQTT, what are the particular details of it. So it's frightening in the beginning, but if you come to think of it, I'm also a switching routing guy. I started with that, so that's where, well, I have lots of knowledge still. BGP is not, it's not an easy protocol to understand. So we have some difficult things on switching and routing, but we managed to learn, and some of us can configure BGP or SPF and other complex things on switches and routers. I would say the same with wireless. There are nuances, there are things that are more complex. So we do not have to be frightened about learning APIs. It's another topic, another subject. Yes, we have to take the time. There is a learning curve, but it's very rewarding because it's a very powerful tool. Automation, as you said, is a very strong word. So I can do many things that if I do that well, it looks like magic sometimes because I'm tying things together and all of a sudden it gets much easier to do the things I used to do in the past manually. So I'm getting lots of interest from the SEs in the field. Many are contributing with ideas. I see many starting to work with APIs directly using tools like Postman or using and creating dashboards using Node-RED. So little by little, we are enlarging this internal, well, knowledge landscape. So it's coming.
Yeah, it's I guess if you want to rewind the clock 50 years, it probably looks like witchcraft from that perspective. But
yeah.
You know, and so you brought up a good point because routing and switching. So when I think about automation with routing and switching, certainly there's certain aspects of that fit really well. And once you've managed a wired network at scale, you realize how much of a challenge that really is, right? I mean, it's very time consuming. You start to, as you grow organically, you start to lose touch with certain aspects of it because you're growing faster in some areas than you're care and feeding others. So when you look at kind of what you would like to see out of an API solution for our wired products down the road, what would that really look like to you?
Well, what we have today for the ISX switches is we have two ways to do automation. One is using Ansible. We have Ansible playbooks for a couple of years, I guess, and there are plans to continue evolving, meaning creating more new playbooks for ICX. So that is one way. So with Ansible, I can pretty much automate the CLI, get results, make a decision, do configuration change. So that's there today. The other way to do automation on ICX today using REST API via the smartphone controller. So right now, the ACX doesn't have a native REST API support. It's coming. But what we have today is REST via the smartphone controller, which works very well. So with those two methods, we can do a variety of things. So if I have to create many VLANs, or also add security on top, or QoS on top, well, I have to use a combination of REST via smartphone and Ansible. So that's the way of doing things today. Because we are in the business of access networks, we don't see much routing right now on the ICX. We don't do complex things like, well, I came from Foundry, so we used to do more complex things with OSPF, BGP. Not right now, maybe in the future, if we get more strength and return to data centers and service providers. But VLANs, QoS, security, maybe some rate limiting, those are things that we do today on the access layer. So the idea is, why touch two different products if I have to create a WLAN? And let's say a WLAN on smartphone has some, well, I have to configure VLANs. Maybe I have some configuration regarding security. Maybe I have some configuration regarding QoS. So why not matching the smartphone configuration with the ICX and vice versa? So everything that I create on the smartphone is also configured on ICX automatically. So those are things we are pursuing. Actually, I'm more than happy to hear the field about their needs on automation. So smartphone, ICX are two very important components that we want to make easier to use and to configure.
You know, that statement, make it easier to use, is such a relatable statement, because when you look at it, it's one of those situations where you could walk in to meet with a customer, put this in front of them, and even if they're not asking for it, once they're done looking at it, it's something that in my mind they're going to say, well, I want it. I wasn't asking for it, but I want it, because you start to see the value in that, especially at scale, and even not at scale. I mean, we always talk about networks at scale, but even smaller networks, at least in terms of a smaller footprint, may necessarily go through more churn and change than larger networks at scale anyways. So you're starting to bring all of these things into it that really kind of open up, you know, more operational efficiency in terms of managing that network, which is really cool. And we have, so just within the education lab itself, Joe Abe was kind enough, it's not Ansible, but he was kind enough to create Python scripting that we use YAML playbooks for. And that's what I use for all of my lab resets. So before this, I used to have to do it manually. So I'm running around, you know, at lunchtime during a class trying to flip the entire lab over for a new group that's coming in. And it would take me all of an hour, if not longer, sometimes to do it. And now it takes me 10 minutes. I can flip a switch, go eat, and come back, and I have total peace of mind. So being a automation customer in a way, I can't speak highly enough of it. And I can definitely see all of the different places where it definitely fits and plays. You know what I mean?
No, yes, we have a variety of examples. Just recently, I was talking to a colleague who wants to automate the creation of hotspots using Whisper. So the thing is, you have to go inside of every zone, every WLAN, and create the portal. And he has like 100 zones to go inside. So he has to repeat the same task over and over 100 times. So why not trying to automate that? Maybe some REST API calls, maybe some Postman scripts could be used quickly to automate tasks like that. So if you have the tools, or if you know there are tools at your disposal, you start thinking of ideas all the time. So it's very powerful tool, being able to use APIs and stuff to automate things.
Oh yeah. Big, scary new things that make your life tons easier. You know, it's really cool kind of just talking to you and listening to all that. It's interesting to me that no matter who comes to you and what the problem is, it's always going to be something different, because you have I mean, you literally have your fingers in every single piece of the pie within the product portfolio and a different solution for all of them, which is, I mean, that's really the definition of what the API strategy and API planning is, right? Is to enable all of those different pieces.
Correct. Let me just add another component. It's not just our products. We are also trying to get integration hooks with other vendors like Palo Alto, Scout, you name it. So we have a colleague, Rodolfo. He works in our group in solutions engineering, but he's taking care of integrations with other vendors, security integrations mostly right now. So that also required sometimes APIs. Sometimes it's just not us because maybe we need to change our code, maybe smartphone code. So smartphone needs to send a API call to Palo Alto. So that also involves engineering sometimes. But Rodolfo is working closer to that, meaning trying to integrate with other companies using our own products. So when APIs are required, then I get involved. But anyway, it's a very broad environment, as you said. So I try to touch all of our products, but every now and then I have a new request coming out with a totally different thing, and every now and then we get a new partner or a new vendor that we need to figure out how to integrate with. So it's challenging sometimes, but it's a very fun job, I would say, because I'm learning things all the time and trying to help the SCs, the customers, and partners as well.
It's a really encouraging thing to hear that conversation, because I speak from experience coming from a large enterprise environment. We never wanted to be in a position where we were vendor locked, right? So we didn't have one vendor across the board. Well, the way that the industry works now is, especially from our standpoint, we don't make a firewall, right? So we've got to find ways to work with some of these other appliances. And what you're saying is our way of not saying, well, we can provide this solution from a hardware perspective. We can provide this solution from a functionality perspective, which is a whole new avenue that wasn't opened years ago, right? And so that's a really encouraging thing to hear. And it's playing nice with others. So we're really enabling customers in new ways that is really intriguing. You know what I mean?
Oh yes, you're right. We do not have end-to-end solutions covering every component. So we do not have firewalls, as you said. So we have to integrate. So that's what we are doing. And actually, pretty much, we started maybe last year, November, December, with that idea coming from Jeanette. Let's go and find out how to integrate with security vendors. So Palo Alto might be one, Scout, others. So we started pretty much on that, but the scope is enlarging all the time. So it's important that we have other vendors around, establish those partnerships. It's not true that you find today a customer using one single vendor for everything. So the customer will have a variety of vendors, and he wants openness. So we are in a good position because we do follow many standards for APIs. So we have to leverage that. So I don't see many other companies talking out loud about APIs and openness. So that is one thing that we must try and make everyone aware, customers and partners, that we do follow standards. We are open. We can integrate. We have the details, and we are here to help.
So I want to ask you about IoT. So when you look at IoT as it is today, what are some of the API driven things that you're doing in IoT environments?
Well, we have a division. We have the PLMs. We have engineers working with IoT, and they are developing the ecosystem pretty well. So many of the things that we see ready today, ready to use, like ASA, Abloy, Contact.io, Sotter, those things are done by them using APIs. So either REST or MQTT. So they're doing that already. I try to assist, but the work's being done pretty good. Sometimes I engage. I'm mostly around Node-RED because as you might know, we have today a Node-RED instance built into the IoT controller. So with that instance, I can start API calls around. So it's not difficult to integrate IoT or IoT controller with smartphone or other products. One idea that I'm pursuing right now, actually not my idea, it came from a group of SEs, is to use ESLs. ESLs are electronic shelf labels. So they are like LCD displays. It's not LCD, it's more like e-ink displays using Bluetooth. So they're mostly used on retail, on supermarkets. So I have a e-ink display where I can send out prices. I can update the prices remotely on the shelves. So I'm pursuing that venue to use our IoT controller, actually all the IoT suite, access points with Bluetooth enabled, the IoT controller. So I can send out, using REST API, an update, a price update to those labels using our IoT controller and our access points. And that's all around using REST API and open APIs. So that's one thing I'm starting to work on now. But most of the work is being done pretty well by the IoT team. They are the ones with all the knowledge, with all the relations with many partners already.
What is your favorite API function that you've come across? What's the one that always sticks out and you're like, man, that is awesome?
Come again? What was the question?
Just your favorite overall API function or feature that you've come across, or
okay. Well, it's funny. I like the things when they are complex, when we have to take care of the details. Because of that, I tended to like MQTT a little more than REST. And with MQTT, we pretty much we we just do monitoring. We don't do configuration changes with MQTT. We just receive a large string of data. So maybe analytics data. So we have MQTT strings coming out from smartphone towards SSCI, towards Ruckus Analytics. So I like to play with that. I didn't do lots and lots of things with that, but I like the level of detail, the complexity around that. Another example is the pre-engine API, MQTT API coming from a smartphone for location services. And believe me, we have lots of partners working on that. So they consume the raw data coming from the APs like RSSI, client MAC address, timestamp. So they use that raw data from every client. Doesn't need to be associated to a WLAN to do location analytics, to do marketing, to do campaigns. So we have a variety of partners doing that. So every now and then a new partner comes and requires our assistance. So I kind of enjoy that. Those things around MQTT.
Oh, that's really cool. I was going to say it's software; they don't have feelings, so you can't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, a lot of this is creation driven, right? You're creating.
Correct.
You can create user credentials and configure resources, time together, things like that. Are you seeing APIs used for any level of troubleshooting?
For troubleshooting. Not much. It's much more, as I see today, an operational tool and monitoring tool. So we use REST to do configuration changes mostly. We use MQTT for monitoring. But that makes me think of one other project I'm working on. So we have customers that they want to validate the configuration, to do an auditing on the configuration. I would not say that's troubleshooting, but let's say I want to compare a configuration between 3 different smartphones. I have one smartphone which is my template. It's working fine. It's a good configuration. I want to compare other smartphone instances against that one. So how do I do that today? We don't have a tool for that today. So one way is to fetch the relevant configuration from that particular smartphone controller, fetch the others, do the comparisons, and come out with a report with a diff between the configurations. That might be sometimes used for troubleshooting. Maybe one controller is running fine, the others are not, but that's pretty much an auditing tool for configuration. So troubleshooting wise, right now, I don't see much. Maybe for monitoring, I could use the data string coming from the smartphone to do monitoring, but it's much easier probably to use SSCI or Ruckus Analytics directly.
Yeah, and I mean that just talking about comparison, like config comparison or diffs or whatever is, I've always considered that preventative troubleshooting because nothing makes me crazier than when you look at 3 different devices that perform the same function in 3 different areas and they're all configured differently. Nothing makes my brain melt quicker than when I see something like that. So I've always been a huge proponent of standards in your configurations, golden configs, things like that. So yeah. Marcelo, honestly, I could sit here and talk to you about this stuff all day, and I know you're busy, and I know we're kind of cruising up on the top of the hour. Is there anything else that you wanted to promote, communicate to everybody?
Well, that's a good opportunity to tell everyone that if you have interesting ideas about automation, about how to use use cases with APIs, please send those ideas out. Send those ideas to me. We might find ways to develop those ideas. So I'll be more than happy to work with everyone to create new interesting use cases around APIs and automation.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you're not an internal employee, if you're a partner or a customer and you don't know how to reach us directly, you can always use the ruckcast@comscope.com email, and I will be sure to send that to Marcelo and his team, and they will take a look at it. So awesome. Marcelo, thank you again for joining me. We're going to circle back in October when some of these other tools and platforms are out there, and definitely talk about this more.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. So take care.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Ruckcast. If you just found us for the first time, be sure to follow or subscribe on your platform of choice so you can be notified of future episodes. If you have ideas for future episodes or can't find Ruckcast on your favorite platform, contact us at ruckcast@comscope.com. And as always, thanks for listening.